Hello everyone, welcome back to the next Ask Dr. Kurt podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the pelvis. Now, why would we talk about the pelvis? Well, on our path to excellence, our top 10% of physiology, top 10% of structural health and movement, pelvis is our number one starting point, or the starting point when it comes to structural balance, to proper movement, to, classical sense, chiropractic. This is our number one starting point. If your pelvis isn't level and functioning properly, nothing else is going to work. Your jaw's not going to be right. Your neck is going to hurt. Your upper back's going to hurt. You're going to have knee problems. Anything in the body, basically all movement issues, structural pain, etc., is all related to the pelvis. So this is our number one visit. If you call my office and I'm in pain, I need to do this, this is the first thing we check. And I would say about 70% of the time, if not a little more, this is an issue we do have to address, because if you have chronic neck pain and your pelvis is unlevel, we're never going to get rid of that pain. Every time you stand up, every time you sit, it's going to be pulling on that neck to cause pain. Of course, it's obvious it's a part of the low back problem. The pelvis is the foundation. We have to get the foundation right. So this article, we're going to start breaking down what does it look like, or what are the steps, or you could say, in terms of my sense, what visits in the office, what are we going to look at in the office to get you to that peak absolute structural balance, because that's necessary for health. And I have some interesting tidbits before we dive into what does the pelvis visit look like? What are all the things we have to look at? And I think it'll be a more exhaustive than you think. It's mind-boggling how many things have to be in balance just for one basic thing to work in the body. And we're talking today about the level of the pelvis. We need the pelvis to be level when you look at it. One guy, his name is Terry Hertog. I might be mispronouncing that, but he's from Belgium. He might be one of the number one endocrinologists in the world. He's a hormone doctor. Really, really smart, has a lot of really good books, really expensive books. But if you want to understand hormones, he's the guy to go to. And I always thought it was interesting. His top 5 tips for living a healthy life include the following. 1, posture. 2, hydration. 3, diet. Number 4, avoiding sugars. And number 5, having passion in your life. I always found it really interesting that, let's say, one of the number one doctors on the planet for anti-aging, for hormones, for living your best possible life, reaching absolute peak health, and has dedicated his whole life for it, doesn't have hormones in one of his top 5 ways for living a top healthy life. I always thought that was really, really interesting. And it plays into the things you control for health. Yes, we have some control of hormones and can live a hormonally optimized life. But at the same time, if we don't have good posture, structural health, so that leads into, chiropractic and applied, what I do and what, a big part of what we do here at this practice, drinking water, moving, these things, you're not going to reach absolute health. And the hormones essentially begin to not matter because they're not going to change your body for the better. My main mentor, his name is Dr. David Leaf. He's an applied kinesiologist and chiropractor in Plymouth, Massachusetts. So if anyone's close here on the East Coast, I would recommend, if you want to see one of the best genius chiropractor movement body minds on the planet, you need to take a trip to Plymouth and go check him out. I've done, many hours of study with him, seminars and, online things, and visited his practice. And it's one of those things when I was young and first got out of school, balancing the pelvis and being good with low back pain and pelvis issues was something I took a little pride in. Then you go watch a master like David Leaf and you realize I'm at a kindergarten level when it comes to understanding how the body moves and works. So this is after quite a few years of studying his stuff and trying to be better This is kind of the next, my interpretation. Hopefully I've made it to junior high in terms of helping the pelvis. And this is the main purpose of this podcast, is just to give people an idea. Back pain, structural pain, getting people healthy, getting them moving properly is very, very complex. In the office, it seems easy. We try to simplify it down and turn it into one or two little things you can do at home, plus maybe some, a visit or two at the office to get things balanced out and get you moving and not being in pain. But I want to iterate this. There's a ton of factors we have to take into account to make sure you are living your best life. And this is years and years of knowledge. So I hope everyone takes advantage of it, comes in and gets their body moving correctly, because in the words of David Leaf, I think he said this, I might be wrong, walking is by far the main thing anyone can do to stay and be healthy. The thing is, no one walks correctly. And I never would have thought, graduating chiropractic school, over a decade ago at this point, that the main thing I'd be doing in my office in terms of chiropractic care would be teaching people to breathe, teaching people to walk, and getting, improving posture, you kind of know, but breathing and walking. Never would have thought that. We didn't learn a single thing about that in chiropractic school. So those are the things we have to do. And walking, when you do it correctly, you breathe properly and you move properly and your posture improves. All right. So let's get down to, what does the first chiropractic visit look like? The pelvis. Well, first thing we do is we have to look at someone's posture. So we're looking at someone's posture and we're saying, is this, or does this look right? No, I don't know. That's part of why we have to assess. We have to look, we have to watch people. Next, we have to look at the pelvis. Is it level? So we go to the top of the hip bones and you check, is it level? When someone stands there, is it level? Most of the time you can see it. Then when you watch them walk, they have a short leg and a long leg, and the body moves funny, or a lot of times the body doesn't move at all. They walk really, really stiffly, which is interesting. And that becomes our number one thing. If the hips are unlevel, we have to level the hips. Nothing is going to improve until we get that balanced. So to put in perspective, the things we have to assess to get a pelvis level. We have a face down. We have to look at a bunch of different muscles. So my face down assessment, and we got 4 different positions we assess the body in. Face down, we have to look at the glute max, the strength, and hip range of motion. We got hamstrings, which is looking at the sciatic nerve, L5. Piriformis, so we have to look at range of motion with the piriformis, as well as strength of the muscle. So these are all things. So we're looking at range of motion, muscle activation. So that's more of our applied kinesiology muscle testing. We're looking at essentially assessing nerve function, classic chiropractic. And we're looking at joint stability with range of motion of the piriformis, as well as muscle activation of the piriformis. So that's a lot. That's just face down. Now we're going to flip someone over and we're going to look at them face up. So spine down. And here we look at your psoas, your gracilis, which is your groin, your sartorius, which is, I kind of throw it into the groin category, and your QLs, so your quadratus lumborum. So those are all really heavy tests. And the thing I want to point out here is if someone has a groin or sartorius weakness, a lot of times that is more so associated with an adrenal issue versus, an actual pulled muscle. The muscle still might be injured. We still might have to do muscle work, get that working. Sometimes we do have to even work on the pubes bone. But in addition to that, a lot of times that indicates an adrenal problem. And then when we think back to groin injuries, a lot of times they do happen in conjunction with a stressful event, a breakup, in professional sports, divorce, accidents, family issues. Young kids, usually, less of what adults would call a major stressor event, but it could be very stressful to them. So the groin, very interestingly, is associated with the adrenal glands. And we can even break it down to the gracilis is more associated with the adrenal cortex, which would be more hormone related. And the sartorius with the adrenal medulla, which is more catecholamines. So this is where applied kinesiology becomes interesting. But now we're at leveling the pelvis, looking at classic chiropractic issues, looking at joint stability issues, and now we're into biochemical issues, all from assessing the pelvis. Seated, this is where it gets interesting. This is more of our lumbar balance, because first we look at the psoas, the rectus femoris, the tib anterior, the piriformis in a seated position, and the hamstrings. These are looking at L2, L3, L4, L5, S1. And we have to see, the interesting thing here, what I always thought was genius, was if they're weak seated, we then take the weight off the spine, put it into the arm. So you lift yourself up, and then we reassess. If the muscles now become strong, that indicates it is a back stability problem, which tells us a lot. If the muscles don't become strong, it indicates a muscle injury. So part of the assessment here, we're looking at, is it coming from the spine, or is it a muscle injury, or both? Sometimes it can be both. Think your spine gets, a little unstable at a certain level. Well, if you keep pushing it, the muscle itself will eventually become injured, and now you have a double whammy of a problem. So that's how we start seated, and then we do side lying, both sides. And that's looking at the glute medius, which is the muscle that fires and then keeps our pelvis balanced. So obviously, if we have a pelvis unleveling, the glute medius will be involved. So those are just the muscles associated with the pelvis. As we move up, we also assess another thing seated as we move up. We assess the transverse abdominus, and that starts moving into breathing, your diaphragm, your rib motion, which is then going to move into how we walk and move as part of this thing. Now, as we can see here, this is just step one. This would be our classic chiropractic assessment of the pelvis and low back, and essentially our beginning day one, because if the pelvis isn't level, we can't fix anything. Beyond that, we have to assess range of motion. This may not be on day one, but it's part of our pelvis visit, or what we would call pelvis program, because in order to get the pelvis balanced, we have to make sure we have proper range of motion. If one hip is tighter than the other, we got piriformis, internal, external hip rotation, hamstring. Most of the time it's the hip flexors are too tight because we sit so often. We have to address these things because our fascia and tissue is going to pull us back out of place. Because the whole goal of this is not just a simple chiropractic visit to get you out of a little pain. The whole goal of this is to create better movement and a better life. If we don't give you ways of fixing that or simple solutions to start unwinding these habits, we're not improving health at all. We're just offering symptom relief. So range of motion starts moving into our long-term solution. We have to change range of motion. We have to reach optimal range of motion. We have to reach full strength and full range of motion to get optimal hip function. And next part, we have to make sure all the muscles work. And this means in an applied kinesiology sense, we do repeat muscle testing. So that means you should be able to hold a muscle test for 20 to 30 reps in a row. If you can't, that means the muscle's fatiguing. It means it has an injury, or sometimes we need to redo nutrition if all the muscles are fatiguing out in the body. But a lot of times when you injure yourself, the muscles lose strength and they lose endurance. So what that means is if you're at the gym and you're doing squats and your glutes are weak, how many reps can you do before the glutes give out and now you're compensating and overloading muscles that shouldn't be overloaded in that movement? Is it 1 rep? Is it 2 reps? Is it 5 reps? Is it 12 reps? A lot of people do 10 reps, kind of an average thing. They're doing 10 reps of everything at the gym, or more sometimes if you're doing a bodybuilding program. Well, if you're burning out after 1 rep, that's 1 good rep, 9 bad compensated reps that are going to lead to injury. So we have to look at some of these things. And I'll tell you, most often when a muscle is weak, when people come in, when we test muscles, we find this weak pattern, we have to level out the pelvis. The main muscles of weakness, we have to start with 1 rep. And that's not a forever thing. It usually takes about a week or 2. It takes firing that muscle multiple times a day, doing muscle holds, doing isometrics, doing single reps. And then we build up the endurance. And by the time you get to about 8 reps, now we're strengthening. Now we're changing the pattern of that muscle. But that's a big thing. So now we're up to, normal chiropractic stuff, range of motion stuff, rehabbing muscles to get them stronger and more resilient and building up that endurance. And the last thing is we have to move correctly. And we do have to retrain movement in a lot of people, training them how to walk and breathe. Breathing is movement. We're going to cover gait and movement and breathing in another episode. But today it was really kind of the purpose of talking about the pelvis and just kind of iterating what a chiropractic visit looks like, what the first visit looks like in most people. Now, if you come in with a specific injury and different things, of course, we're going to address that. But in a general sense, you want to come in, I want to feel better, my body's kind of achy and in pain. This is where we start. And you can see it's a lot of things we look at. And then we have to begin to balance them out. And I hope if anyone has any questions, about this, I think we may, if we get enough interest, we may go into what the range of motion and mobility looks like. And if we get enough, if people really want to see how this is all done, we might be able to set up even a video of showing someone getting assessed in this way. But until next time, we'll see you then.